Hi, my name is Judy Dean, and this is my bachelor's project. This is my journey to the University of Metaphysical Science. So I was sleeping soundly in my bed on January 9th, 2018, and the phone rang about midnight. I answered the phone, and it was my brother in law, Glenn, who was informing me that my oldest brother, Fred, had passed away. I was relieved and saddened both at the same time, as my brother had been battling a genetic disease that he and some of my other brothers and sisters have. And he had been bedbound for about a year and no ability to communicate at all, and was completely cared for. So again, it was a relief, and yet I was saddened by the loss of my oldest brother. As my brother in law, Glenn, was telling me the story, I quickly realized, even in my sleepy haze, that there was something else definitely wrong. I asked Glenn, what happened? What is it? And he told me that his wife, my sister Patty, who had been battling breast cancer for about 10 years, had had a seizure that night. And they were in the emergency room. And he began to sob. And he said, Judy, it was bad. So that was all on January 9th. My sister ultimately regained some of her uh, physical properties after the seizure. She had began, when I saw her in the emergency room that night, her speech was very slurred. She was very slow. But over the next few days and weeks, she kind of started coming around again, being more like herself. Again, obviously still battling breast cancer, and now finding out that it had metastasized obviously to her brain, which as a nurse, I had already unfortunately known, but didn't want to think about, just because obviously it was my sister, and she had told me a few details prior to having the seizure, and I pretty much knew that that's where we were headed. I think she had a seizure previously. Just from what she explained to me, I knew it was a seizure, but she didn't recognize that, and I didn't say that word to her. So a few weeks later, January 23rd, my oldest sister, who also had that same disease called Machado Joseph's, she succumbed to her disease as well. Our family was now rocked, as I, being the youngest, was tasked with telling my other brothers and sisters what had happened, most of whom have that disease as well. So, about a month later, February 28th, my niece phoned me and said that I should come down, that my sister Patty wasn't doing very well, and I should come down. So I went to go see her, and that evening I watched her take her last breath and return to a loving energy. To the sobs of her son and daughter, which still 2 years later are very, very, very clear in my mind. After losing my brothers and sisters, I was very devastated, obviously, and I spent the next 3 or 4 months in a drug and alcohol induced haze of grief. I rode my motorcycle across country. I rode my motorcycle fast and while intoxicated multiple times. I took trips and ultimately found myself on a plane coming home from Vegas. As I was sitting in the chair, ready for takeoff. I was hungover, I was stoned, and I began to cry. And I thought to myself, I'm going right back into the same world that I've been running from. The three of them are still dead, and there's nothing I can do about it. Nothing has changed. That lost weekend that I just spent in Vegas that I don't remember didn't change anything. I don't know how much money I lost. I don't really know what happened, but I felt terrible and I knew I needed to do something. So when I landed and came home, the next day I reached out to a grief counselor and I began to see a grief counselor. I realized that what I was experiencing was normal. Maybe my way of coping and dealing wasn't normal for everyone, but that what I was feeling was normal, that it was grief and it can be very intense, and that I should give myself permission. I began to do little things to help myself overcome the grief. I would set my alarm every 2 hours in my phone and breathe, close my eyes and feel my feet on the earth, and just remind myself that I was alive. I began to notice some changes in my thinking, my way of thinking, that that I'm here for more than just what I was doing at this particular moment. I was here to do more than just be a nurse in a hospital and spend time doing that. So I started seeking out um, teachers, and when the student is ready, the teachers appear. And I got turned on to Wayne Dyer and began to listen to his books and study his work. I began to listen to Joe Dispenza and Bruce Lipton tell their stories, and Brene Brown tell her story, and everything began to come together. I began to learn about essential oils and energy medicine and Reiki, and I became certified in Reiki. I continued moving forward and began to study tapping and other forms of energy medicine. And that road began to change my life. I began to do presentations about self care and taking care, how important it is to take care of yourself, that self care is not selfish. I began to use my practices with my patients. And then I would have colleagues come to me and say, this patient so and so is I having a really hard time. Could you do that thing you do? Could you do whatever you do? They're anxious or they're in pain or I don't know what they're doing. And can you do that thing? And really, that thing is just kind of connecting with people on a different level, right where they are. And it really became apparent that I was set for other things and set for bigger things. I was watching a group of podcasts, and I remember listening to this woman speak, a beautiful blonde woman, and I wish I could remember her name. And she just seemed to be speaking my language. Everything she said, I agreed with. I just thought, that's exactly what I think. And who is this woman? And I saw on the bottom of the screen, it said that she had a PhD in metaphysical science. I didn't even know what metaphysical science was. I had never heard about metaphysical science in my nursing teaching. I had never heard of metaphysical science in the rest of the teaching that I had done over the years. And so I wrote that down and I continued to listen to her podcast and be very enamored by her. I then researched metaphysical science and found the University of Metaphysical Science. I began reading and studying and doing the meditations. Everything just kind of started to fall into place. My sister Patty and I, before she passed, had had a conversation. I think she was a little bit worried about me because on February 7th, which was about 3 weeks before she passed, a friend of mine and I were riding motorcycles through the hills, and my friend lost control of her motorcycle and crashed. And I laid my bike down as to not roll over her in the middle of the road. And I remember very distinctly saying, "Please, God, don't let my bike end up on top of me." And my next memory was running towards my friend in the middle of the road. She almost lost her foot. It was just barely hanging on. And after she was metaflighted out and off of the scene, I rode my motorcycle 2 hours home. And in coming home, I just kept saying, I don't have a scratch on me. I laid my bike down at 40 miles an hour and I don't have a scratch on me. There wasn't dirt on my chaps. There wasn't dirt on my leather jacket. My hands weren't scraped. My boots weren't scraped. My bike was a little bit scraped up. And I thought, how in the world did that happen? And so the next day I went to go see my sister Patty and I told her the story. And she told me that she was worried about me. And we talked about it, how maybe my oldest brother and sister had been watching out over me. I said, because it kind of was almost like I just got plucked up and then set on my feet, because I said, I don't even remember standing up. Did I was obviously on the ground. My bike was on its side. And at the end of that meeting, when I was ready to go home, I gave her a hug and we touched chest to chest. And I whispered in her ear, watch out for me, watch over me. And she whispered back in my ear, I will always watch over you. After she passed, I had dreams of her. She came to me in my dreams, and I know she knew I was devastated. And she told me it was all right. And she thanked me for being there with her when she passed, and thanked me for being with her husband and comforting him and her kids at the time. And every time I see bird fly, whether it's a raven or a turkey vulture or a red shoulder or a red tail hawk, I think of my sister. And I can't even tell you how many times when I ride, I will see a group of turkey vultures buzzing, and it will be way off in the distance. And pretty soon, one is flying right over my head. And it happens so often. Sometimes when people ride with me, they say, did you see those birds? Because they'll fly right over my head. I know that's my sister watching out for me. And once I began to study metaphysical science and learning about angels and all the other wonderful, wonderful chapters that I continue to read, I know she's with me. And it's such incredible confirmation. I love my studies. My bachelor's project is just the beginning. I too will have a PhD in metaphysical science. I am so grateful and so thankful for the studies. Thank you very much. I hope you have enjoyed my story. My journey is just beginning. And again, I am so thankful.